Hello everyone. In today's video, we'll see how to create a custom attribute directive in Angular. So to start with, we need to understand what exactly a directive is. So whenever you want your HTML element to behave in a certain manner, you use directives. So a directive is basically used to attach a specified behavior to your document object model element. It's like a marker on your DOM element. So the Angular team provides us with some built-in directives in Angular. Some of them are ngbind, ngHide, ngModel, nginit, etc. So the convention that the Angular team uses is ng followed by the name of the directive. Our major focus in this video will be to see how to create a custom attribute directive of our own, and we are free to use any convention, any naming convention. Before going on to create one, we need to see what are the different types of directives in Angular. So there are three types of directives in Angular: component, structure directives, and attribute directives. The most commonly used of these directives is components. So components are the directives that have a template of their own, that have an HTML file of their own. So as we'll see further, that directives do not have a template or an HTML of their own. So components are those directives that do have a template of their own. They're also known as self-contained directives. The second type of directives are structure directives. Structure directives are used to change the layout of your DOM by adding or removing elements. ngIf and ngFor are the most commonly used structure directives in Angular. The third type of directives are attribute directives. Attribute directives are those directives which are used to change the behavior or the appearance of your HTML element. Our major focus today will be to see how to create a custom attribute directive and to see how to change the behavior or appearance of an HTML element. Now, before going on to create a custom attribute directive, let us see what are the different steps involved in creating a custom attribute directive. So step 1 says that we need to create a class and decorate it with the decorator @directive so that it starts behaving as per the specified behavior in the directive. Now the step 2 is the most important step in creating a custom attribute directive. In this step, we inject two services of Angular. Now services is a vast concept of Angular, so we'll not go into the details of what services are. But let's understand that whenever we need to create a custom directive, we need to inject these two services called elementRef and renderer. In third step, we need to register our directive in the module, and the step 4 is to use the directive on the element which we are creating the directive for. So now we have created a project in Visual Studio Code using ngNew. The project is called F. So our first step is to create a directive file by going in src, and inside app we create a new file by the name bgcolor.directive.ts. So this is the convention we use to name any directive or any component, name.directive or component.ts. So now that we have created a directive file, our step 1 is to create a class. So we say export class and the name of that class, let's say bgcolor.directive. You can give any name to your class, and you have to decorate it with the decorator @directive so that your class starts behaving as a directive. So this is the syntax that you follow for your directive. Now to give a name to your directive, you use selector, and after that this is the syntax wherein you'll use square brackets, and inside that you give the name to your directive. Let's call it app.chcolor. You can give any name to your directive. Now this is the name of your directive that you have created. This is your custom attribute directive. Now that you have created your directive, step 2 says that you have to inject two services. This is our step 2. So you go inside your class, and now this is one step which is very important, so please pay attention here. So I'm writing a code and I'll explain what does it mean. when I write this. So yeah, this is the constructor that I have created right now. And inside that I have injected two services, element ref and renderer. So I'll minimize this so that it becomes visible now. Yeah. So as you can see, there are red underlines in these because these have not been imported to the import declaration. So I right click on this and then I say add renderer to existing import declaration as well as element ref. So now that I have added them, these have gotten declared. So yeah, this statement means that inside the constructor you have injected two services, element ref, which is going to take the reference of your element, and renderer, which is going to render your application. This is the task of these two services. Now inside constructor, whatever you do will be the task of your directive. So now let's say I have a requirement. I want that the element on which I apply on my custom directive on, that should change its color when I ask the directive to do so. So inside my class, I create a new function to change the color of the host element or the HTML element. So let's create this function which says change color, and the property is, and the argument says color. So here we'll say this dot renderer, because renderer is gonna render your application, dot set element. See, in the suggestions we get set element style. So yeah, set element style, and inside the brackets we'll say this dot el, which is the notation of your element, dot native element, which again is the syntax, comma, and now I want to set its color property to color. So yeah, this is how. So this is the syntax of creating our new function, which is change color inside the class. So now that I have created this function, I want to use this function inside my constructor. So I'll say this dot change color to, you can pass any string, let's say red. So now that I'm done with creating my directive, I have created the directive, I have created the class, I have named my directive also. Now I have injected these two services as well. The next task is to use some requirement, which I have done. Now our third task is to use our directive inside, like register our directive in the module. So we go to our app.module.ts. Before that, let me just save it here, and now I go to app.module.ts, and here I have to declare my directive. So in the declarations, when you go, say comma, and what was the name of your directive? So this is the name that has to be used in the module. This is the name that is to be used in the HTML, whereas this one is the name of your directive, which is going to be used or declared in the app.module.ts. So here you can simply put it and import. Yeah, so this is imported as well as declared. So our third step is done, and our fourth step is finally to use our directive on some HTML element. So you go to your app.component.html and create an element, say div, and you say hello people. Then you create another div, yeah, so another div. Inside that you say how are we all doing. So the purpose of creating two div elements is that on one element we'll be applying our custom attribute directive, whereas on the other one we won't. So let's see what is the name of our custom attribute directive to be used in the HTML. This is the name, right? So I'll copy it from here and I'll go to app.component.html and place the name here. Simply pasted it here. So now this is the syntax of using the name of your custom attribute directive after the element inside that tag. So this says on this element you have applied your custom attribute directive, whereas on this one you have not applied it. Now let's compile it and see what are the results. Okay, so now that we have compiled it successfully, now we go to the browser to see what are the results. Okay, great. So as we can see, the div element on which we applied our custom attribute directive on has changed its behavior and turned its color to red. Whereas the other div element on which we did not apply our custom attribute directive is the same. It has not changed its color. Great. So let's move on now. So now that we have understood how to use a custom attribute directive on an HTML element, we need to understand various terminology before jumping to the next concepts of custom attribute directives. So as you all saw, whenever you use your custom attribute directive on an HTML element, that HTML element becomes your host element of that particular custom attribute directive. So in the above case, when we discussed, div element was your host element because you applied your custom attribute directive on the div element. So that is considered to be your host element. Now the next thing is host listener. Now whenever you want to access the events of your host element, you use host listener. So suppose you want that whenever the user clicks on the host element, it should change its color to some other color. So for that, we will create a function which handles the click event of the host element. So for example, if we have created an event, say foo, and we want that on the click element, on the click event, so you want that on the click event of your host element, this function should be called. So you'll have to use host listener because you're trying to access the event of your host element. So that's why we have decorated the function with host listener, and you will simply add this to our import declaration by right clicking on host listener. So now that you have created your function, your task is that whenever user clicks on the host element, the host element should change its color to some other color. Let's hard code it to say green. And you also want that after changing the color, it should alert the user that host element is clicked. Seems alright? Yeah. So now let's compile it and see what are the results. Okay, so now I again go to my browser and see the changes that have come. So now I want that on the click of my host element, I should get the alert that host element is clicked and that the host element should change its color. So let me try clicking on it. Okay, so it alerts me that host element is clicked and now it should change its color to green. Great. So till now we are in the right direction. Let's move on. Now there's something called host binding. So whenever you want to access the properties of the host element, you use host binding. So let's take an example and see how do we do that. So for example, we have a property called border which is of string type, and you want that the user should click on the host element and its property border should change. So for that you need to decorate it with the decorator host binding. And within the brackets you say style dot border, right? So now you want to access it on the click of your host element. So inside the click event, you'll say this dot border equals to say 5 pixels, 5px solid black, right? Yeah. So now you want that whenever the user clicks on the host element, it should get a border around it which should be of 5 pixels and should be of solid black color. So now let's see what happens. Let me save it. Okay, so now when I go to the browser and reload it, so on the click of the host element, I expect that it should alert host element is clicked and it should change its color, and this time it should also change its border. Great, so it has changed its color to green and it has also changed its border to 5 pixels solid black. So that's what we wanted to do. Great. So this is how we created a custom attribute directive to change the behavior or the appearance of the HTML element. To learn more topics in Angular, refer to these books by BPB Publications. Also, do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.